Hello and welcome to Daily Dose Radio, a 5-minute-a-day podcast studying the Psalms verse by verse, recorded here in the dining room of the Bible Bistro, located in Sharonville, Ohio. Hey there friends, welcome back to Daily Dose Radio here in the Bible Bistro. And today in the Bible Bistro we're looking at Psalm 68. Now this psalm, we're going to study this all this week, but we're going to do it in two parts. Part 1 this week will be through verse 18, and Part 2 next week will be verses 19 through the end, which I think is 35. I think it's 35 verses long. But we're going to take it a little bit at a time because the two sections are somewhat different, and it's just longer, so I don't want to do too much at once because this is 5 minutes a day, 5 days a week, studying the Psalms verse by verse, and if you get too many verses in a day, it just becomes a little too heavy. So we're going to look today at verse 1 through 4 and then take up verse 5 tomorrow. This is the introduction to this psalm says, it's of the choir master of David, a psalm, a song. So this is another one of those psalms, and we've had several of them in a row now, starting back in 66. We've had these songs that have been penned for us. This is another one of those. Kidner says in his commentary that he believes that this was penned by David when David brought up the Ark of the Covenant from Obed-Edom's house. And that this is an ascent psalm because we're going from Obed-Edom's house all the way up to Jerusalem. So we're ascending into the city because that's where the ark is going to dwell. It's going to stay there. So perhaps that's true. I don't know. I think it's a fine guess at commentary here because we just don't know. But there are lots of things that might, we see them and we think, well, maybe this is a psalm of ascent when David took the ark to Jerusalem because it's of David. And why wouldn't they sing this song? And it begins in verse 1, very much like every other time when they would take up the ark and move it on the wilderness march. So we'll talk about that here in just a moment. But let me go ahead and read verses 1 through 4. Let God arise. Let his enemies be scattered. Let them also that hate him flee before him. As smoke is driven away, so drive them away. As wax melts before the fire, so let the wicked perish at the presence of God. But let the righteous be glad. Let them rejoice before God. Yea, let them exceedingly rejoice. Sing unto God. Sing praises to his name. Extol him that rideth upon the heavens, by his name Yah, and rejoice before him. So that is verses 1 through 4. And as I said, we're going to begin with this first verse here because it is very interesting. Yes, so this is very much like Numbers chapter 10, verse 35. And let me read that just as a reference here. It came to pass when the ark set forward that Moses said, Rise up, Lord, and let thine enemies be scattered, and let them that hate thee flee before thee. So every time the ark would go forward on the wilderness march, this was the devotional saying that Moses would say every time that they would take up the ark and the march would go forward. If this is, David taking the ark to Jerusalem, well, then this really works, doesn't it? But then he goes on there in verse 2, as the smoke is driven away, so drive them away. As wax melts before the fire, so let the wicked perish at the presence of God. But let the righteous be glad. So we have this contrast. We have the opening blessing for the ark's moving, for the blessing that God is moving and scattering his enemies. But you'll notice that we continue that thought there in verse 2. As smoke is driven away, drive them away. As wax melts, so let the wicked perish at the presence of God. So God is that fire, that's holy fire that stands in the presence of the world, and the wicked will melt before that flame. And then you notice the contrast there in 3, but let the righteous be glad. So the enemies are scattered and the righteous are glad. The enemies flee before him, the righteous rejoice before him, and they exceedingly rejoice before God. the wicked perish at the presence of God, and yet at the presence of God, the righteous sing praises and rejoice before him. So you see the contrast that is created there in verse 3. So you have verses 1 and 2, God is doing a work amongst the wicked, and then in verses 3 and 4, you have the contrast to that, which is the righteous, they are rejoicing before God as he moves through this world. Okay, well, join me again tomorrow. We'll look at 5, 6, and 7 here on Daily Dose Radio. Thanks for listening to Daily Dose Radio. For more fresh and delicious Bible studies, podcasts, books, and more, check out the Bible Bistro online and on YouTube. Join me again next time for Daily Dose Radio.